up, guys? This is gonna be a quick tutorial on how I'm doing my color grading. It's not too difficult. I don't have like any magic tricks, but I do have some useful tips. So basically we're gonna take this shot right here that look really bland and lacking colors, and we're gonna turn it into this. Now it's really not complicated. I don't have like any magic tools or anything, but it's just some useful things that I've learned, I guess. So let's begin. First things first, when I'm starting to color something, the first thing I'm doing is going here into Lumetri scopes, yeah, using that tool, waveform luma. You can use the other ones, but I find this one the most useful. So basically what it does is, you see that 0 line, that's where the blacks are crushed at. You see that 255 line, that's where the highlights are blown out at. So you basically want to have like a nice structure in here, not touching 0 and not touching 255. So anything in between is fine, but you don't want to hit those, because that's going to give you blown out highlights and crushed out blacks. Alright, so the first thing I'm doing personally is I'm going here into basic correction and I'm fixing the exposure to make it look nice. And then I just lower this until I see it almost hits 0 right here. You can tell how close it is. So to the point where it almost hits 0, about here, you can stretch this out if you want, if it will help you. But yeah, something like this should be fine. Next thing I'm doing is playing around with the shadows to get more like a dark looking kind of shot, because it fits the atmosphere that I need to get here. So I'm just playing around with the shadows a little. That seems about right. Next thing is to play around with the highlights. So that should be about right. You want to make sure you're not reaching 100, because then your highlights are going to be blown out. Just like this. As you can see, everything is fully blown out and we do not want that. Next thing I'm doing is playing around with the contrast a little. You know, adding a little contrast can always help. But make sure when you're adding contrast, pay attention to the blacks and whites. As you can see, when I'm dragging the contrast up, it makes the blacks even worse. It completely crushes the blacks. So let's say I want the contrast to be like that. So what I would do is I would finish adjusting the contrast, and then I would go back to blacks and just fine tune this until I see that it doesn't really hit 0, just like that. That should be fine. That looks pretty decent already. That's the log footage, and that's the properly exposed footage. As you can see, look at the difference in the histogram as well. Alright, the next thing that I'm doing is going into curves and playing around with the colors a little. And then you have these 5 graphs right here. Personally, I'm only using the first 3, and I'll explain. So the first one is basically hue versus saturation. So let's say I want to make the blues pop out even more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 3 points. 1, 2, 3. And then when I'm pulling the middle point, you can see how it's affecting only the blues. So that's really useful. And then let's say I want to change the color tone of the blues. So that's what hue versus hue is for. So I basically do the same thing, 3 points. And then the middle point, as you can see when I'm changing it, it changes the hue, which is really cool. And then hue versus luma, which is like the brightness of the specific color you're choosing. So let's say I'm going to drag this down. You can see how it's making it either brighter or darker as I'm changing it. So basically I like making dominant colors pop out even more. So what I want to do here is I want to make the reds pop out a little more. So I'll take this, I'll put 1 point here, 1 point here, and then 1 point here to make sure that it doesn't affect the rest of the graph. And then I'm simply going to drag that up just like that. As you can see, it makes the reds pop out even more, which is exactly what I wanted. So let me do something like this. That seems about right. And now I want to make the blues pop out even more, just a little bit. So I'll put 3 points right here. I'll drag this up just a tiny bit. Like that. That seems about right. And now I want to change the hue of the blue. So I'll take 3 points right here. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to play around with this just a tiny bit to make sure that I'm reaching the color that I want, which is this one, because I don't want the blues to take too much attention of the actual scene. and the reds seem way nicer in my opinion, so I'll give more attention to the reds. Alright, now that's done. If we disable curves and enable curves, you can already tell how different the shot looks now. So we have basic correction out of the way, we have curves out of the way, and now I want to go into color wheels. Now here, that's what really changes the shot. So for this shot, I need like a dramatic look. So what I would personally do, yeah, that's up to you what you're doing here, but I would take the shadows a little to the greenish area, about here, something like that. That looks pretty nice. So I would keep it right here, and then midtones I would take it to the yellows a little, just a tiny bit, and then the highlights I would take to the blue area just a tiny bit, just like that. As you can see right off the bat, just playing around with these three wheels, it really changed the shot. So from this, it went to this. Now at the same time, you could change the exposure levels of each color wheel. So let's say I want to make the shadows darker, so I'll just drag this down, just like that. And as you can see, it's really affecting the shadows. So to add like a dramatic look, I would probably drag it down just a tiny bit, just like that. Midtones, I really like powerful midtones, so I would drag this up a little, just like that. And highlights are not really affecting anything because we've already messed around with the highlights, but I would drag it up just a tiny bit to make the shot pop out even more. Now that seems way better. Like comparing this right out of the camera to this, it's completely different. Now what I would do next is I would go into creative, and then I would change the sharpen to like 30 or 35, just to make sure that the shot looks even sharper than it is. As you can see, if I'm disabling sharpen, it does take away from the quality just a little, and that would be it pretty much. So we really changed the shot just from like tweaking a few settings, taking it from this to this, which gives like a completely different look to the shot than what it was before, and I'm really happy with the result.